For 3 years, I'd been trying to reach Danny Gates, my 12-year-old autistic student who had never spoken a word in my classroom. Everyone said he couldn't learn, couldn't understand, couldn't connect. When I collapsed from a heart attack with only Danny in the room, I thought I was going to die. I had no idea that the boy everyone had given up on was about to save my life, using skills none of us knew he had. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, have you ever been surprised by someone's hidden abilities? Drop it in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more amazing stories every day. Now, let's go back to the classroom where everything changed. The morning started like any other Tuesday at Roosevelt Elementary. I was setting up my special education classroom for another day of what many of my colleagues considered an impossible task, trying to teach children that the system had labeled unteachable. After 15 years in special education, I'd learned that every child has potential. It's just a matter of finding the right key to unlock it. But Danny Gates was testing even my most optimistic beliefs. Danny had been in my class for 3 years, ever since his family moved to our district. He was 12 years old, diagnosed with severe autism, and completely nonverbal. He'd never spoken a word that anyone could remember, rarely made eye contact, and spent most of his time engaging in repetitive behaviors like lining up pencils or rocking back and forth. His previous teachers had essentially given up on him. His IEP meetings were exercises in lowered expectations, with goals like, Danny will remain seated for 5 minutes, or Danny will not disrupt other students. Even his parents, loving as they were, had resigned themselves to the idea that their son would never communicate or learn in any meaningful way. But something about Danny intrigued me. Maybe it was the way his eyes would flicker toward me when I was explaining something to the class, or how he would sometimes pause in his repetitive behaviors when I mentioned certain topics. There were moments, brief, almost imperceptible moments, when I felt like there was someone home behind those dark eyes, someone who was listening and understanding more than anyone realized. "Good morning, Danny," I said as he entered the classroom, following his usual routine of walking directly to his desk in the back corner without acknowledging anyone. Danny sat down and immediately began arranging his pencils in a precise line, organizing them by length and color. It was the same ritual every morning, and most people saw it as meaningless autistic behavior. But I'd started to notice patterns in how he arranged things, almost like he was creating his own system of organization that made sense to him. Today we're going to learn about emergency procedures, I announced to my class of 8 special needs students. It's important that everyone knows how to get help if someone is hurt or in trouble. I watched Danny out of my corner of eye as I explained how to use the classroom phone, how to call 911, and how to find help in the school. While the other students were clearly struggling to follow along, Danny's pencil arranging had stopped. He was listening. "Danny?" I said gently. "Can you show me where the phone is?" He didn't respond, didn't look up, didn't acknowledge that I had spoken, but I could have sworn I saw his eyes dart toward the phone on my desk for just a split second. "That's okay. Maybe tomorrow." This was the pattern with Danny. Tiny moments that made me think he was understanding, followed by a complete non-response that made everyone else think I was imagining things. During lunch, I sat in the faculty room with my colleague, Donna Reardon, who taught the mainstream 4th grade class next door. "How's Danny doing?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "I think he's making progress," I said, knowing how that sounded. Donna gave me the look I'd gotten used to, part sympathy, part skepticism. "Michael, you've been saying that for 3 years. Maybe it's time to accept that some kids just can't be reached." "Every child can be reached," I said firmly. "We just haven't found Danny's way yet." "His way?" Michael, the kid doesn't even acknowledge that other people exist. He's never spoken a word, never followed a simple instruction, never shown any sign that he understands what's happening around him. He understands more than we think. Based on what? Your gut feeling? I couldn't explain it to Donna because I couldn't explain it to myself. It was just a feeling, an intuition built on 15 years of working with special needs children. Danny was different from other nonverbal autistic students I'd worked with. There was something there, something waiting to be discovered. His parents are considering moving him to the state facility, she said gently. They think he'd be better served in a more specialized environment. The state facility. I'd visited it once, and while the staff was caring and professional, it was essentially a warehouse for children that society had given up on. Kids went there and rarely came back to mainstream education. He belongs here, I said. He belongs in a classroom with other kids, with people who believe in him. Michael, you're the only one who still believes in him. Even his parents are losing hope. That afternoon, I stayed late to work on lesson plans and grade papers. The school was quiet. Most of the staff and students long gone. I liked these peaceful hours when I could think and plan without interruption. I was reviewing Danny's file for the 100th time, looking for clues I might have missed, when I felt a sharp pain in my chest. At first, I thought it was just stress or indigestion from the cafeteria lunch. But the pain intensified, radiating down my left arm and up into my jaw. Heart attack. The realization hit me with crystal clarity even as the pain drove me to my knees. I was having a heart attack, alone in my classroom, with no one around to help me. I tried to reach for the phone on my desk, but another wave of pain sent me crashing to the floor. My vision was starting to blur, and I could feel my heart racing irregularly in my chest. I needed help, and I needed it now. That's when I remembered that Danny was still in the classroom. He'd been staying after school for the past few weeks while his mother worked late. She would pick him up around 4:30, and it was only 3:45 now. He was sitting at his desk in the corner, probably arranging his pencils or engaging in some repetitive behavior, completely oblivious to the fact that his teacher was dying on the floor. "Danny," I gasped, though I could barely get the words out. "Danny, I need help." No response. Danny continued whatever he was doing at his desk, showing no sign that he'd heard me or was even aware that something was wrong. I tried to reach for the phone, but the pain was overwhelming. My left arm was completely numb now, and I could feel myself losing consciousness. This was it. I was going to die in my classroom, and the only witness was a boy who couldn't or wouldn't communicate with the outside world.
"Danny," I whispered one more time, using what might have been my last breath. "Please, help." And then, something extraordinary happened. I heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Through my blurred vision, I saw Danny stand up from his desk. But instead of his usual aimless wandering or repetitive movements, he was moving with purpose, walking directly toward my desk. He picked up the phone. I watched in amazement as Danny, who had never shown any interest in technology or communication devices, carefully lifted the receiver and held it to his ear. His movements were deliberate, confident, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. He pressed the buttons on the phone, not randomly, but in a specific sequence. I realized he was dialing 911. "Emergency," I heard a voice say through the receiver, tinny but clear in the quiet classroom. And then, Danny spoke. Not in the halting, uncertain way you might expect from someone using their voice for the first time, but clearly and calmly, like he'd been speaking his entire life. "Help," he said into the phone. "Roosevelt. School." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Danny's voice was clear, articulate, and completely normal. "Pale," Danny continued. The dispatcher was asking more questions, and Danny was answering them all with few words, but answering. "Class 1-5, Danny said. He hung up the phone and then did something that shocked me even more than his sudden ability to speak. He knelt down beside me, looked directly into my eyes, the first time he'd ever made eye contact with me, and said, "Help." "Okay." Then he stood up and walked out of the classroom, presumably to meet the paramedics and guide them to our room. I lay there on the floor, fighting to stay conscious, my mind reeling from what I'd just witnessed. Danny hadn't just spoken. He'd demonstrated cognitive and communication abilities that no one knew he possessed. He'd assessed the situation, taken appropriate action, and communicated effectively with emergency services. All this time, while we'd been treating him like he couldn't understand or learn, he'd been watching, listening, and absorbing everything around him. He knew how to use the phone, knew the school's address, knew about the side entrance that would be accessible to the paramedics. 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway, and Danny appeared in the doorway, followed by 2 paramedics. "Here," Danny said, pointing to where I lay. The paramedics immediately went to work, checking my vital signs and preparing me for transport. As they loaded me onto a stretcher, I caught Danny's eye one more time. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded solemnly. The next few hours were a blur of emergency room procedures, tests, and surgery. I'd had a significant heart attack, but thanks to Danny's quick thinking and clear communication with the emergency services, I'd received treatment in time to prevent permanent damage. When I woke up in the hospital the next morning, my principal, Dr. Florence Williams, was sitting beside my bed. "How are you feeling, Michael?" she asked. "Like I got hit by a truck," I said honestly, but grateful to be alive. "Is Danny okay? Did his mother pick him up?" Dr. Williams smiled. "Danny is fine. And Michael, we need to talk about what happened yesterday." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Danny Gates, the boy we've all been treating as severely cognitively impaired, not only saved your life, but demonstrated cognitive and communication abilities that none of us knew he had."
She pulled out her phone and showed me a video. The paramedics were so impressed with Danny's handling of the emergency that they asked him to demonstrate how he'd called 911. We recorded it. I watched in amazement as Danny calmly and clearly explained his thought process. He described how he'd been aware of my distress, how he'd remembered the emergency procedures I'd taught in class, and how he'd decided that calling for help was the appropriate response. "But that's not all," Dr. Williams continued. "After you were taken to the hospital, Danny stayed with me in the office while we waited for his mother. He answered every question I asked him, demonstrated reading and math skills far above grade level, and showed understanding of complex concepts that we never knew he'd absorbed. He's been learning all along," I said, though I was still struggling to process the magnitude of what had happened. "More than learning. Michael, we had Danny evaluated by the district's autism specialist yesterday evening. Her preliminary assessment is that Danny has been masking, deliberately hiding his abilities because of anxiety, sensory overload, or other factors we don't fully understand yet." Masking. I'd heard of it, but had never encountered it to this degree. Some autistic individuals, particularly those with high intelligence, learned to camouflage their differences by suppressing their natural behaviors and responses. In Danny's case, it seemed he'd been so overwhelmed by the social and sensory demands of the classroom that he'd essentially shut down, hiding his true capabilities behind a wall of silence. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now, we completely reevaluate Danny's educational plan. We're going to provide him with alternative communication methods, sensory supports, and an academic program that matches his actual abilities rather than our assumptions about his limitations." And his parents? Are in shock but thrilled. They're meeting with the autism specialist today to learn about communication devices and strategies that might help Danny feel more comfortable expressing himself. 2 weeks later, I was back in my classroom, still recovering, but determined to return to the job I loved. Danny was there waiting for me, but everything about our interaction was different now. He was using a tablet with a communication app that allowed him to type responses and have them spoken aloud. Through this device, he was participating in class discussions, asking questions, and demonstrating knowledge that amazed everyone who worked with him. "Welcome back, Mr. Torres," the tablet said in its electronic voice as Danny typed his message. "Thank you, Danny. I'm glad to be back." He typed another message. "I'm sorry I couldn't talk to you before. It was too hard. But I was always listening." "I know you were, and I'm proud of you for finding your voice when it mattered most." Over the following months, Danny's transformation was remarkable. With the right supports and communication tools, he began to flourish academically and socially. He was moved to a mainstream classroom for most subjects with support from a special education aide who understood his needs. But perhaps more importantly, Danny's story changed how our entire school approached students with disabilities. Teachers began looking more carefully for signs of hidden potential, and we implemented new assessment methods designed to identify masking behaviors in autistic students. "You know what I learned from all this?" I told Donna Reardon one day, as we watched Danny participate in a science experiment with his mainstream classmates. "What's that?"
That sometimes the students we think we're teaching are actually teaching us. Danny taught me that intelligence and communication come in many forms, and that our job as educators is to keep looking for the key that unlocks each child's potential. 6 months after the heart attack, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference on autism and education. They wanted me to share Danny's story and discuss the implications for how we identify and serve students with hidden abilities. Danny came with me to the conference. Using his communication device, he spoke to an audience of hundreds of educators, parents, and autism advocates about his experience of being trapped inside his own silence and the relief of finally being able to express himself. "I was always learning," his device said, as he typed his message to the audience. "I was always understanding. I just couldn't show you in the way you expected." Mr. Torres never gave up on me, even when everyone else did. He kept believing I had something to say, and eventually I found a way to say it. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. After the conference, as Danny, his mother, and I sat in the airport waiting for our flight home, he typed a message on his tablet that he showed me privately. "Thank you for seeing me." I felt tears well up in my eyes as I read his words. "You were just waiting for the right moment to shine, Danny." A year later, Danny was thriving in his mainstream classes, using his communication device to participate fully in discussions and demonstrate his remarkable intelligence. He'd become something of a celebrity at our school, not because of his disability, but because of his incredible academic abilities and his role in changing how we thought about autism and communication. But the most meaningful moment came during our annual IEP meeting. Danny's parents, his teachers, the autism specialist, and I were all gathered around the conference table discussing his progress and goals for the following year. "Danny, is there anything you'd like to add to your educational plan?" He typed on his tablet for a long moment, then turned the screen so everyone could see his message.
I want to become a special education teacher like Mr. Torres. I want to help other kids who are trapped in silence find their voices. I want to show people that being different doesn't mean being less. The room fell silent as we absorbed the profound wisdom of this 12-year-old boy who had spent years being underestimated by everyone around him. I think that's a wonderful goal, Danny, I said, my voice thick with emotion. And I think you're going to be an amazing teacher someday. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up his entire face, and typed one more message. I learned from the best. 5 years later, I was sitting in the same classroom where Danny had saved my life, working with a new group of special needs students. Among them was a 9-year-old girl named Maria, who hadn't spoken since starting school, who spent her days drawing elaborate pictures that no one could interpret. But I had learned something important from Danny Gates. I had learned that silence doesn't mean absence, that different doesn't mean deficient, and that every child, every single child, has something extraordinary to offer if we're patient enough to discover it. As I watched Maria carefully arrange her colored pencils in a complex pattern that probably made perfect sense to her, I smiled and said, "Good morning, Maria. I'm glad you're here." She didn't respond, didn't look up, didn't acknowledge that I'd spoken, but I could have sworn I saw her pause for just a moment in her pencil arranging, and I knew that somewhere behind those quiet eyes, someone was listening.
Someone was learning. Someone was waiting for the right moment to show the world what they could do. And I would be there when that moment came, just like I'd been there for Danny, just like someone needed to be there for every child who was waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be believed in. Because that's what teachers do. We don't give up. We don't stop believing. We keep looking for the key that unlocks each child's potential, no matter how long it takes to find it. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, our students end up saving our lives in ways we never expected. Not just physically, but emotionally, professionally, and spiritually. They remind us why we became teachers in the first place, to make a difference, to see potential where others see problems, and to never, ever give up on a child. Danny Gates taught me that the quietest students sometimes have the most important things to say. They just need someone who's willing to listen with more than their ears, someone who's willing to see with more than their eyes, someone who's willing to believe in possibilities that others can't imagine. Today, Danny is in high school, excelling in advanced placement classes and volunteering as a peer tutor for other students with autism. He still uses his communication device, but he's also developed some verbal speech and has become an advocate for autism awareness and acceptance. He stops by my classroom sometimes just to check in and see how my current students are doing. And every time he visits, he reminds me of the most important lesson any teacher can learn. Never underestimate the power of believing in a child, even when, especially when, everyone else has given up hope. Because you never know when that child might end up saving your life. An absolutely powerful story about hidden potential, the importance of never giving up on any child, and how sometimes our greatest teachers come in the most unexpected forms. Have you ever been surprised by someone's hidden abilities? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story of Michael and Danny touched your heart and reminded you of the incredible potential in every child, please hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories about teachers, students, and the moments that change everything. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.